Part 7, The Mythology of the Norsemen, Introduction to Norse Mythology, and perhaps one of the most interesting illustrations for this book is this. You've got a big old body with a, I don't know, a cloud or a fiery trail or something, so maybe it's a comet. And you got a little stellar body there, you got a bigger star, and you got a line of stars. So obviously you're watching the night sky. But its significance, maybe we'll see in the story. The world of Norse mythology is a strange world. Asgard, the home of those considered to be gods, is unlike any other heaven men have dreamed of. No radiancy of joy is in it, no assurance of bliss. It is a grave and solemn place, over which hangs the threat of an inevitable doom. The entities know that a day will come when they will be destroyed. See, the Jinn have respite, so we're talking about the Jinnute world, right? Sometime they will meet their enemies and go down beneath them to defeat and death. Asgard will fall into ruins. The cause of the forces of good are fighting to defend against the forces of evil. Is hopeless. Nevertheless, the entities will fight for it to the end. Necessarily, the same is true of humanity. If these entities are finally helpless before evil, men and women must be more so. The heroes and heroines of the early stories face disaster. They know that they cannot save themselves, not by any courage or endurance or great deed. Even so, they do not yield. They die resisting. A brave death entitles them, at least, the heroes, to a seat in Valhalla, one of the halls in Asgard. But there, too, they must look forward to the final defeat and destruction. In the last battle between good and evil, they will fight on the side of the entities and die with them. This is the conception of life which underlies the Norse religion. Well, series of religions, really, and you find monotheism to polytheism completely in pretty much every racial group. So, as somber a conception as the mind of man has ever given birth to, the only sustaining support possible for the human spirit, the one pure, unsullied, good man can hope to attain, is heroism, and heroism depends on lost causes. The hero can prove what he is only by dying. The power of good is shown not by triumphantly conquering evil, but by continuing to resist evil while facing certain defeat. Such an attitude toward life seems at first sight fantastic, but actually the decrees of an inexorable fate played no more part in the Norseman's scheme of existence than the predestination did in St. Paul's, or in that of his militant Protestant followers, and for precisely the same reason. Although the Norse hero was doomed if he did not yield, he could choose between yielding or dying. The decision was in his own hands. Even more than that, a heroic death, like a martyr's death, is not a defeat, but a triumph. The hero in one of the Norse stories who laughs aloud while his foes cut his heart out of his dying flesh shows himself superior to his conquerors. He says to them, in effect, "You can do nothing to me because I do not care what you do." They kill him, but he dies undefeated. This is stern stuff for humanity to live by, as stern in its totally different way as the Sermon on the Mount, but, well, the Sermon on the Mount is far less unique when you look into the history of religion, but the easy way has never in the long run commanded the allegiance of mankind. Like the early Christians, the Norsemen measured their life by heroic standards. The Christian, however, looked forward to a heaven of eternal joy. The Norseman did not. But it would appear that for unknown centuries, until the Christian missionaries came, heroism was enough. Which this kind of factors into the Nietzschean, you live a heroically authentic life, is one of the things underlying that philosophy. Forget any quotes that you like or dislike. Philosophy is something a little more than that. The poets of the Norse mythology who saw that victory was possible in death and that courage was never defeated are the only spokesmen for the belief of the whole great Teutonic race, of which England is a part, and ourselves through the first settlers in America. Everywhere else in northwestern Europe, the early records, the traditions, the songs, the stories were obliterated by the priests of Christianity, who felt a bitter hatred for what they called paganism, and that they had come to destroy. It is an extraordinary, coming back as Christianity is losing its hold and people are turning to what was called paganism and heathenism, whether it was monotheism like Judaism and Christianity. Well, Judaism, people are taking Judaism away from the rabbis and turning to art and Kabbalah and their own analysis and expression. It is extraordinary how clean a sweep they were able to make. A few bits survived: Beowulf in England and Nibelungenlied or Lied. How do you say that? Yeah, it's Lied, I guess. In Germany, and some stray fragments here and there. But if it were not for the two Icelandic Eddas, we should know practically nothing of the religion which molded the race to which we belonged. In Iceland, naturally by its position in the last northern country to be Christianized, the missionaries seem to have been gentler, or perhaps they had less influence. Latin did not drive Norse out as the literary tongue. The people still told their old stories in the common speech, and some of them were written down, although by whom or when we do not know. The oldest manuscript of the Elder Edda is dated about 1300 of the Common Era, 300 years after the Christians arrived, but the poems it is made up of are purely of what they would call pagan. Pagan and heathen to a Roman speaker, relating to the Latin words, I guess some Greek or something, but it's material culture. If you're monotheist or polytheist, that has nothing to do with whether you're a thing or whether you're Mithraic or not. Again, it has nothing to do with these terms. And adjudged by all scholars to be very old, the Younger Edda in prose was written down by one Snorri Sturluson in the last part of the 12th century. The chief part of it is a technical treatise on how to write poetry, but it also contains some prehistoric mythological material which is not in the Elder Edda. The Elder Edda is much more important of the two. It is made up of separate poems, often about the same story, but never connected with each other. The material for a greater epic is there, as great as the Iliad, perhaps even greater, but no poet came to work it over as Homer did the early stories which preceded the Iliad. Now, sounds like a challenge to me. Comment if you want to see me do that. There was no man of genius in the Northland to weld the poems into a whole and make it into a thing of beauty and power. No one ever discard the crude and the commonplace and cut out the childish and worrisome repetitions. Well, sometimes repetition has it has effect that without certain patterns are formed and that sort of thing. There are lists of names in the Edda which sometimes run on unbroken for pages. Nevertheless, the somber grandeur of the stories comes through in spite of the style. Perhaps no one should speak of the style who cannot read ancient Norse, but all the translations are so alike in being singularly awkward and involved that one cannot but suspect the original of being responsible, at least in part. Well, if you don't speak a language, their way of thinking and, that sort of thing can kind of be awkward, right? The poets of the Elder Edda seem to have had conceptions greater than their skill to put them into words. Many of the stories are splendid. There are none to equal them in Greek mythology except those retold by the tragic poets. All the best northern tales are tragic, about men and women who go steadfastly forward to meet death, often deliberately choose it, and even plan it long beforehand. The only light in darkness is heroism.